My name is Alex Jones and I'm 32 years old. The state-of-the-art home lab my mentor, Professor Alistair Finch, had helped me build was supposed to be my sanctuary. Instead, it became the stage for the most calculated intellectual theft of my life. "He's just a pawn," I heard my father, Thomas Jones, say to my mother, Victoria, over a crackling line, not knowing I was listening. They were basking in the glow of the prestigious Zenith Global Innovations Conference in Geneva, plotting to claim my groundbreaking quantum AI algorithm as their own. So I made a decision. When they returned, flushed with anticipated glory, their digital key no longer granted access to my network. The lab was empty of their influence, and my digital signature, subtly embedded in the very code they sought to steal, silently read, "Innovation recognizes its true source." Before we pull back the curtain further on this saga, tell me, where are you watching from? And if you crave more tales of those who refuse to be outsmarted, please hit that like button and subscribe. Also, don't forget to ring the bell. Growing up, intellectual recognition was always tight in our household. My parents, both failed academics with a perpetually bitter chip on their shoulders about missed professorships, never let me forget that every intellectual pursuit I undertook was a reflection or an extension of their own unfulfilled potential. True genius is cultivated through seasoned minds, my father would often lecture, subtly implying my ideas were derivative. My mentor, Professor Finch, was different. While my parents saw only limitations or opportunities for their own advancement, Professor Finch saw raw, unbridled potential in me. "Alex," he'd tell me during our late-night coding sessions in his cluttered university office, "never let anyone tell you what your work is worth. You define that for yourself." Those sessions with Professor Finch were my escape. His mentorship felt like freedom, unlike the tension-filled air at my parents' home, where every discussion circled back to their academic struggles. When I turned 20, Professor Finch secured me a research grant, a rare opportunity for someone so young. My parents considered my independent research an unnecessary deviation from their guidance and refused to acknowledge its merit. "Independent research is for those who think they're above collaboration," my father would sneer, though I later learned he'd simply never secured a significant grant himself. I worked tirelessly, fueled by my passion, eventually developing the AI that would change everything. Then came the day that threatened to change everything for the worse. My parents, knowing I was finalizing my quantum AI for a major presentation, started making increasingly intrusive suggestions. They referred to my lab as the family's intellectual property hub, and casually spoke about when we present this at Zenith. All while I was bearing the full brunt of the research costs, server maintenance, and patent fees. "We should really re-optimize these algorithms," my mother would say, looking at the code I'd just meticulously debugged. "I don't like the inference parameters," my father would announce, completely disregarding the intricate calculations behind them. Despite my growing success as a software engineer, now commanding a comfortable six-figure income, my parents treated me like a prodigy playing with inherited toys. When I attempted to establish boundaries, their response was always the same: "Family doesn't have boundaries." But somehow, those lack of boundaries only worked in one direction, always benefiting them. About 3 years into this arrangement, my parents announced their intention to attend the Zenith Global Innovations Conference in Geneva, a dream of theirs. What they didn't announce was how they intended to fund their lavish trip, or, more sinisterly, their plan to piggyback on my work. "We can use your presentation slot," my father casually mentioned one Sunday dinner. "You mean my presentation slot?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "The one I've been preparing for years?" "Don't be selfish, Alex," my mother chimed in. "Your professor would have wanted us all to benefit from your breakthrough." I refused to hand over my presentation. But I did make the mistake of offering to help them with some of the conference expenses, knowing they couldn't afford it otherwise. Before I knew it, I was funding nearly their entire trip. Flights, premium passes, extravagant spending money, all while they complained that the hotel I booked wasn't centrally located enough. The day before they left for Geneva, I overheard my mother on the phone with her sister. Of course, Alex is paying. It's the least he can do considering we let him develop his theories under our roof. Let me develop my own theories. The ones Professor Finch specifically guided me on? I should have recognized the red flag, but honestly, I still desperately wanted their validation. If only I had known what was coming, I might have changed the network passwords before they ever left for Geneva. It was a Tuesday afternoon in July when everything changed. My parents had been in Geneva for about 6 weeks. I was in my lab after a morning of coding when I remembered that a specific data server had been showing minor glitches before they left. Since they were returning in just a few weeks, I decided to fix it. I needed to ask my father where he had stored the system's diagnostic logs, one of the few hardware components he had actually helped with. I dialed his international number and waited through the series of clicks and beeps that signaled the overseas connection. Hello? My father's voice sounded distant, the connection slightly delayed. Hey Dad, quick question about the server logs. Do you remember where you put them? It's acting up. He sighed heavily into the phone. It's on the backup drive in the main server rack, under critical system data. Why can't this wait until we get back? Because the integrity of the data is currently at risk, I explained, trying my best to keep the irritation from my voice. I just need to access the logs. Fine, he muttered. Your mother and I are about to go to dinner. Some VIP event near the Palais des Nations. Sounds great. How's Geneva? I asked, trying to be polite despite his attitude. Expensive, he replied curtly. Look, I've got to go, we'll talk later. I heard some rustling, then what sounded like my father putting the phone in his pocket. He hadn't hung up properly. I was about to end the call from my end when I heard his voice, now muffled but still audible. Who was that, my mother's voice? Just Alex, complaining about something in the lab again. My father's voice was clearer now, as if he had taken the phone out of his pocket but still thought the call had ended. What now? My mother sounded annoyed. Something about a server. I swear all he does is find problems with that lab. I don't understand why Professor Finch encouraged him so much in the first place. We're his parents. His breakthrough should be attributed to us as a culmination of our groundwork. I should have hung up. I knew I should have hung up, but honestly, something kept my finger hovering over the end call button, unable to press it. Well, once we're back, we need to have a serious conversation about our legacy, my father said. Alex needs to understand that his research is our security for the future. I felt my stomach drop. They were planning something. He's been a burden from the start, my father continued, his voice hard and clear. All those years of education, specialized equipment, everything. Now he has this valuable IP just dropped in his lap, and what? He thinks he deserves it? What has he ever truly invented without our guidance? A burden. The word echoed in my head like a gunshot. He's always been selfish, my mother agreed. But he's also easily manipulated. Remember how quickly he agreed to pay for most of this trip? All I had to do was mention family obligation a few times. They laughed together, a synchronized sound I'd heard my whole life, but now it seemed sinister. We just need to keep working on him, my father continued. Eventually he'll transfer the patent rights to us, or at least add us as co-creators. His weakness is that he still wants our approval. I couldn't breathe. My hand was shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I managed to fumble with my other cell phone and began recording the conversation. What if he doesn't agree? My mother asked. He will, my father said confidently. Alex has always been desperate for our approval. We just need to make him feel guilty enough. Remind him of all we've sacrificed. If that doesn't work, we start talking about our declining health and retirement needs. Trust me, by this time next year that patent will be jointly in our names. And if worst comes to worst, my mother added, we're essentially living off his success anyway. Possession is 9/10 of the law. They both laughed again. I felt physically ill. Speaking of which, my father continued, when we get back, I think we should take over the primary research grants. It's ridiculous that he's managing all the funds when he's hardly ever there because of meetings. Good idea, my mother replied. We should also talk about that new AI ethics initiative he's been looking at. Complete waste of time. If he has extra time to spend, he should be helping us more. Exactly. Why should we struggle while he's building some technological empire? He owes us. The conversation continued as they apparently walked to the restaurant, discussing various ways to manipulate me into giving them more money, more control, more of my intellectual property. I sat frozen in my chair, tears streaming down my face as every illusion I had about my family shattered around me. After about 15 minutes, the connection finally broke. I sat in complete silence, the phone still clutched in my hand. The AI I had worked so hard to create. The intellectual property Professor Finch had encouraged me to protect. The lab I had opened to my parents out of love and obligation. They saw it as nothing more than their entitlement. And me? I was just a burden, a means to an end, someone to be manipulated and used. In that moment, something broke inside me. But something else, something harder, colder, and more determined, took its place. I looked around at the lab I had shared with them, seeing for the first time all the ways they had gradually asserted ownership. My father's consulting chair positioned at my main workstation. My mother's framed inspirations replacing my technical diagrams, my own research notes gradually relegated to my private study. I wiped my tears, took a deep breath, and made a decision. If I was such a burden, perhaps it was time to lift that weight from their shoulders permanently. I called in sick to work for the next 3 days. I couldn't face clients or colleagues with the storm raging inside me. Every time I replayed the conversation in my head, and I did, obsessively, I vacillated between crushing heartbreak and cold fury. How could the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally see me as nothing more than a resource to be drained? After the initial shock wore off, my analytical brain kicked in. I needed information, options, and a solid plan, no emotional decisions. Professor Finch hadn't built his legacy by acting rashly, and neither would I. My first call was to Liam O'Connell, an intellectual property attorney I had worked with on a previous software patent. I explained my situation, careful to stick to the facts. The patent is completely in my name, I concluded. But they've been living in my network, so to speak, for almost 4 years. Do they have any legal claim to my work? Liam was blunt and efficient, which was exactly what I needed. Based on what you've described, absolutely not. There's no common law ownership that would apply here. You've maintained the development, paid all expenses, and most importantly, you have clear documentation of sole inventorship. The fact that you allowed your parents access doesn't grant them any IP rights. What about the fact that they're my parents? Does that matter legally? Not in terms of intellectual property rights, he assured me. You're an adult. You have no legal obligation to share your innovations. The AI is yours to develop, license, or do whatever you please with. I felt a weight lift slightly. At least legally, I was on solid ground. What about the data and research they've accessed? I asked. That's a bit trickier, Liam admitted. Legally, you should provide reasonable notice and opportunity for them to collect any data or documents they might claim as personal. I'd recommend documenting everything carefully and perhaps archiving their data in a secure read-only format where they can access it but not modify it. I took detailed notes and thanked him, my mind already moving to the next step. Next, I contacted my colleague Chloe Zheng, one of the top cybersecurity experts in our firm, who specialized in data security for high-profile tech ventures. I need to secure my entire network, quietly and effectively shut out unauthorized access, and I need it done within 48 hours. Chloe raised an eyebrow. Running from the feds, Alex? The weak joke fell flat against my serious expression. Family situation, I said simply. I need this handled with absolute discretion. No public records, no traceable activity, and I need it done quickly. Chloe whistled low. That's aggressive, even for me. You're looking at a complete digital overhaul. I understand. What kind of overhaul are we talking about? We discussed the scope. My lab's network was complex, but for the expedited timeline and private migration it would require significant effort. I can live with that, I said, calculating quickly. How soon can you start? I can have a secure, isolated network established by tomorrow morning, she said. I'll need your current servers empty of any personal or sensitive data you want to keep. That afternoon, I created a detailed spreadsheet of all the digital assets in the lab, categorizing them meticulously, code I had written, data Professor Finch had provided, files my parents had stored, information of questionable ownership. For the last category, I was ruthlessly honest. If I couldn't definitively prove something was mine, I put it in my parents' column. I wanted no legal or ethical gray areas that could come back to haunt me later. Next came the logistical planning. I needed a new secure off-grid location for my core research, new encrypted communication channels, and a plan for disappearing from their radar. I found a secluded research facility in a city about 2 hours away in the Pacific Northwest. I established new, highly encrypted accounts with providers my parents would never use. I purchased new burner phones and created new obscure email addresses. I meticulously gathered all my important physical documents, my birth certificate, patents, financial records, and especially the deed to my lab and Professor Finch's will, and secured them in a safety deposit box at my new bank. As I worked through my checklist, I occasionally found myself hesitating. Was I overreacting? Then I'd replay the recorded conversation, hearing my father's contemptuous, "He's been a burden from the start," and my resolve would harden again. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of Professor Finch's old research notes I'd kept, I found a digital file he'd encrypted entitled "For AJ Eyes Only." It contained a short, almost poetic note dated just a month before he passed. "My dearest Alex," it began, "I want you to know why I've encouraged your independent spirit. Certain individuals, particularly those close to you, have a history of claiming credit for others' intellectual labor. I've watched them attempt to leverage every opportunity without genuine contribution, but you, my brilliant boy, you've worked for everything you have. You understand the value of both original thought and tireless effort. I'm giving you the guidance on digital watermarking because I know you'll honor it, protect it, and use it as a foundation to build your own success, not as a crutch to avoid responsibility. Never doubt that you deserve every good thing that comes to you. I'm so proud of the man and innovator you've become." Tears streamed down my face as I read his words. It was as if he had somehow foreseen exactly what would happen and was reaching across time to strengthen my resolve. The next day, I contacted a data migration specialist and scheduled them for the following week. I arranged for a secure read-only archive of my parents' digital belongings, accessible only via a mailed access code. Every night, I updated my planning document, crossing off completed tasks and adding new details as they occurred to me. I was operating with cold efficiency during the day, but at night, alone in what had once been my sanctuary, I often broke down. One evening, as I was backing up old project files, I came across a collaboration project from years ago with my father, a naive attempt at joint research. For a moment, I almost called off the whole plan. But then I remembered his voice. He's been a burden from the start. The project files went into the archive labeled Parents' Digital Assets. By the end of the third week, Chloe had secured my network and prepared the migration to the new facility. The pieces were falling into place. My parents would return from Geneva 3 days after the final migration. Perfect timing. The morning of the migration, I woke up with a strange sense of calm. Over the past few weeks, I'd cycled through grief, rage, doubt, and determination. Today I just felt focused. I dressed carefully in a crisp, dark suit, professional, confident, the armor I needed for what would be one of the most significant days of my life. The migration was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning at Chloe's secure data center. I arrived at 9:45, carrying a slim encrypted drive containing the last few core algorithms. Chloe was already there chatting with the lead technician. She gave me an encouraging smile as I approached. She asked quietly, "Ready for this?" I nodded, replying, "More than ready." The transfer began precisely at 10. The technicians, efficient and discreet, began the complex process of moving my core IP to the new, fully isolated network, wiping the old servers, and setting up the access controls. With each progress bar filling, I was simultaneously severing a tie and securing my freedom. When the lead technician finally confirmed migration complete, I felt nothing but relief. Chloe congratulated us, shaking hands all around, and said, "Best of luck with your new setup." Outside in the parking lot, Chloe caught up with me and asked, "You okay?" I managed a small smile and replied, "I will be. Thank you for everything, Chloe. I couldn't have done this without you." She said, "Happy to help. Though I'm still curious about the story behind all this." I told her, "Maybe someday I'll tell you, but right now, I have a new future to build." The data migration was complete by exactly noon. I had already secured most of my personal devices, clearly labeled and separated from my parents' shared tech. I supervised as they loaded my essential equipment, secured drives and personal files into a transport bound for my new facility. My parents' accessible files were handled with equal care, but different destination tags. Everything was photographed, inventoried, and loaded into a separate encrypted archive I'd rented in their names. I'd arranged for the access codes and login information to be mailed to them at their current Geneva hotel. As the technicians worked, I walked through each section of the lab, checking servers and storage units to ensure nothing was overlooked. In their shared workspace, I found a small unmarked USB drive hidden in the back of their desk drawer. Curiosity got the better of me and I plugged it in. Inside were digital correspondence, dozens of emails between my father and various academic institutions over the years. I shouldn't have read them, but I couldn't help myself. They detailed years of failed grant applications, plagiarized seminar papers, and my father's growing disillusionment with his own lack of innovation. One email from a university review board began, "Thomas, this is the last time we will consider your proposal without clear, verifiable original research. Your constant attempts to repackage existing theories are straining our professional relationship." Another, dated just a year before Professor Finch's death, read, "We are deeply concerned about your expectation that your son's research will someday be yours. We suggest you begin making your own genuine contributions that don't involve leveraging another's work." I carefully replaced the USB in the box and added it to the items for archiving. But I felt a renewed connection to Professor Finch and his decision to prepare me for this. He had seen through my parents long before I had. By late afternoon, both data transfers were complete. I stood in the empty lab, my footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floors, without their presence, without their constant scrutiny, without the accumulated evidence of lives lived within these walls. It was just a space again, beautiful, valuable, but no longer tainted by their influence. I walked through each area one final time. In the server room where I'd built my first neural network with Professor Finch. In the main workspace where we'd spent countless hours debugging code. In the quiet corner where he taught me the true meaning of ethical innovation. "I hope you understand," I whispered, not sure if I was addressing Professor Finch or the lab itself. Finally, I activated the pre-programmed digital signature within the Quantum AI's core, the one they had already downloaded and were preparing to present. It was designed to remain dormant until the AI performed its most complex self-learning function, at which point a subtle, irremovable watermark, Project Lumina, developed by A. Jones, would appear on all screens displaying its output. I took one last look around, then disconnected the last network cable, got into my car, and drove away without looking back. As I merged onto the highway heading toward my new temporary research hub, I felt something unexpected: freedom. For perhaps the first time in my life, I was making a decision completely for myself, unburdened by familial obligation or the desperate need for their validation. The burden had been lifted not from my parents, but from me. My temporary lab was nothing special, a well-equipped but unadorned space in a modern complex with amenities I'd probably never use. But it was mine, with no history, no expectations, and most importantly, no one telling me I didn't deserve to be there. The first few days passed in a blur of practical tasks. I unpacked the essentials, set up my new high-security network, and contacted my office to let them know I was taking a 2-week leave of absence, effective immediately. I didn't provide details, just that I needed personal time. By the end of the first week, I had established a routine of sorts. Morning coffee on the small balcony overlooking a man-made waterfall, afternoons spent researching potential long-term research locations, evenings filled with takeout food and complex puzzles to quiet my thoughts. I checked my old email and voicemail exactly once a day, never responding. There was nothing from my parents, yet. They were still enjoying the final days of their conference adventure, completely unaware that their lives and reputations were about to change dramatically. My phone pinged with a text from an unknown number. My heart jumped before I realized it was just a delivery notification. Still, it made me aware of the constant state of tension I was living in, waiting for the inevitable explosion when my parents tried to present my AI. To distract myself, I reached out to Sam Miller, a former lab partner I'd lost touch with, largely because my parents had never approved of his unorthodox research methods. "Alex Jones, is that really you?" he exclaimed when I called. "It's been what, 3 years?" "Something like that," I admitted. "I've been preoccupied." "Let me guess, still trying to please the unpleasable Joneses?" His directness made me laugh for what felt like the first time in weeks. "Actually, I'm calling because I finally stopped trying." We met for dinner that night at a restaurant halfway between our locations. Over sushi and sake, I told him everything: the professor's guidance, the overheard conversation, the IP transfer, my disappearing act, and the hidden digital signature. "Holy crap, Alex," he said when I finished. "That's simultaneously the most terrible and most badass thing I've ever heard. And the embedded watermark? Brilliant!" "I'm still not sure if I did the right thing," I admitted. "Are you kidding me? They were planning to steal your intellectual property IP your professor specifically guided you on. They called you a burden while living off your success and having you pay for their trip. If anything, you were too kind with the whole archive data arrangement." His validation loosened something tight in my chest. Maybe I wasn't overreacting. Maybe this was the appropriate response to years of manipulation. The next day, I scheduled an appointment with a therapist, Dr. Evelyn Reed, who specialized in trauma from family manipulation and intellectual fraud. It was time to address not just the recent betrayal, but the lifetime of conditional support that had preceded it. 10 days after the network transfer, my old phone exploded with notifications, texts, voicemails, emails, all from my parents. They had returned from Geneva and discovered the truth, not just about my absence, but about the watermark. The first voicemail: "Alex, what the hell is going on? We just tried to run the pre-conference diagnostics and your AI is displaying some anomaly. Call us immediately." My father's voice was more annoyed than concerned. The second, an hour later: "Alex Michael Jones, this is not funny. Why is your AI showing Project Lumina developed by A. Jones during the dry run? Call us right now." Now he sounded angry. The third, from my mother: "Alex, sweetie, we're very worried about you. Please call us as soon as you get this. We just want to know you're safe." Her voice dripped with the manufactured concern she'd perfected over the years. The texts escalated similarly, from confusion to demands to threats to fake worry. The final voicemail, left at nearly midnight: "We saw your signature. I don't know what you think you heard, but you've made a terrible mistake. This is our work too. You had no right to sabotage it. We're consulting an attorney first thing tomorrow." "You've really done it this time, Alex." I saved all the messages but responded to none of them. Let them consult any attorney they wanted. The AI had been mine to develop and protect. True to their word, they tried to show up at my firm's office the next morning, causing exactly the scene I'd anticipated. My colleague Jamie texted me, "Your parents are here raising hell." Boss told them you're on leave and showed them the door when they wouldn't leave. Everything okay? I responded with a simple family drama. I'll explain when I get back. Thanks for the heads up. Later that day, my boss called directly. Alex, I don't know what's going on with your family, but they made some pretty serious accusations today. Something about you sabotaging their presentation and stealing their work. I took a deep breath. It wasn't their work, it was mine. Developed under Professor Finch's guidance. I've been letting them contribute to my network, but I recently discovered they were planning to claim full credit for my quantum AI. So yes, I protected my intellectual property, which was fully within my legal rights. I'm sorry they brought this drama to the office. There was a pause before she responded. I see. Well, they've been banned from the premises. Take whatever time you need and let me know if there's anything we can do. Her simple acceptance was another weight lifted. I'd been worried about the professional fallout, but it seemed I had more support than I'd realized. Over the next few days, my parents tried every avenue they could think of to reach me. They contacted mutual acquaintances, distant relatives, even Professor Finch's former university, trying to discredit me. Each attempt further justified my decision to cut ties. 2 weeks after their failed presentation, they somehow obtained my new email address, likely from a well-meaning but naive former colleague, and sent a lengthy message laying out their version of events. According to them, I had misunderstood a private conversation, overreacted dramatically, and betrayed my family in the most hurtful way possible. They were willing to forgive me if I would make things right by using my patent royalties to fund their future research initiatives. The audacity was almost impressive. Even now, they were still trying to manipulate me. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the email to Liam, my attorney, who confirmed again that I had acted completely within my legal rights and advised me to continue maintaining distance. As the weeks passed, I gradually began rebuilding my life. I returned to work, threw myself into my software development business, and continued weekly therapy sessions. I found a lovely, smaller research space to purchase in my new city, not as grand as my old lab, but completely mine in every way that mattered. One evening, as I was arranging my technical manuals on my new shelves, I came across an old project folder I hadn't opened in years. Inside were digital photos of family intellectual collaborations, old prototypes we'd supposedly worked on together, moments that had once seemed happy but now felt hollow, knowing what lay beneath the smiling facades. I closed the folder and put it away in a secure archive. Perhaps someday I'd be ready to look at those memories again, but not yet. For now I was focused on creating new innovations, ones not tainted by manipulation and conditional validation. The burden I'd carried all my life, the desperate need to earn my parents' recognition, was finally lifted. And I was lighter than I'd ever been. I managed to avoid my parents for nearly 3 months. I changed my routines, worked at different hours, and became hyper-vigilant about my surroundings, but I knew a confrontation was inevitable. What I didn't expect was how it would happen. Rachel Chin, a former colleague, called me on a Tuesday afternoon. Alex, I thought you should know. Your parents are back at your old lab. My heart raced. What do you mean at the lab? It's not their lab anymore. I know that, Rachel said, but they're parked outside right now, just sitting in their car staring at it. The new owners, Sterling Labs, are away on business, so I don't think they know yet. I just thought you might want to know. I thanked her and immediately called the director of Sterling Labs to warn him. He was concerned but grateful for the heads up and said he'd alert his security. Later that evening, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Alex! It was my father's voice, tight with controlled anger. We need to meet tomorrow, the cafe on Elm Street at 10 o'clock in the morning. If you don't show up, we're going to your office again, and this time, we won't leave quietly. Before I could respond, he hung up. I called Liam immediately. They're threatening to make a scene at my workplace if I don't meet with them. You don't have to meet them at all, he reminded me. We could get a restraining order based on these threats. I considered this option, but ultimately decided against it. No, I think I need to face them, but on my terms, not theirs. The next morning I arrived at the Coated Bean, a popular tech-themed cafe downtown at precisely 10:15 in the morning, late enough to make a point, but not so late they'd leave. I'd chosen this location because it was public, always busy, and the owner was a former client of mine whom I knew would have my back if things got ugly. I spotted my parents immediately, sitting at a corner table. My mother's face was drawn, her normally perfectly styled hair looking somewhat neglected. My father's jaw was set in that familiar rigid line that had always signaled dangerous waters ahead. I approached their table calmly, dressed in my most professional outfit, another suit of armor. Thomas, Victoria. I greeted them, deliberately using their first names instead of Mom and Dad. My mother flinched. My father's face darkened further. "Sit down." "I'm not here to take orders," I replied evenly. "I agreed to meet you because I thought it might be time to clear the air. But this conversation happens on equal terms, or not at all." I sat down across from them, placing my phone conspicuously on the table between us. "Is that really necessary?" my mother asked, gesturing to the phone. "Given our history, yes," I said. "I record all important business meetings now." "We're your parents, not a business meeting," my father snapped. "And yet you threatened my workplace if I didn't comply with your demands." "That sounds more like extortion than parenting." My directness caught them off guard. They were used to me backing down, accommodating, seeking peace at any cost. "What you did was unforgivable," my father finally said. "You sabotaged our presentation. You stole our legacy." "It was never your legacy," I replied. "It was my innovation, which I generously allowed you to access. A fact you apparently considered a burden." My mother's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" I pressed play on my phone, and their own voices filled the space between us. "He's been a burden from the start. All those years of education, specialized equipment, everything. Now he has this valuable IP just dropped in his lap. And what? He thinks he deserves it? What has he ever truly invented without our guidance?" I stopped the recording and looked up to find my mother pale and my father flushed with anger. "You recorded us privately." "That's illegal," he sputtered. "Actually, it's not illegal to record a conversation that you're part of, which I was, since you called me and then failed to hang up properly. But that's beside the point. The point is that I finally heard what you really think of me." "You misunderstood," my mother interjected quickly. "We were tired. Stressed about money." While on an expensive conference trip that I paid for, I interrupted. "Please don't insult my intelligence by lying to me again." "So you decided to embarrass us at Zenith, expose us as frauds?" my father demanded. "Left us humiliated as some sort of revenge?" "I protected my intellectual property because I finally realized it would never truly be mine as long as you were trying to claim it. And you're not humiliated beyond what your own actions deserve. You have your own academic standing. Oh wait, you squandered that years ago instead of securing your own genuine contributions. You know we could sue you for this. We invested years in your development. We have rights." "Actually you don't," I replied calmly. "I consulted with an attorney before making any decisions. You had no legal claim to my IP, you contributed no original code, incurred no expenses, and your names were nowhere on the patent. But please, feel free to waste what money you have left on a lawsuit you can't win." My mother began to cry, those familiar tears that had so often manipulated me into compliance. This time I felt nothing but a detached sort of pity. "What do you want from us, Alex?" she asked through her tears. "An apology?" "Fine. We're sorry if you misinterpreted what you heard." "If I misinterpreted?" I repeated incredulously. "That's not an apology. That's another manipulation, and it's exactly why I made the decision I did." I took a deep breath, centering myself before continuing. "What I want is very simple. I want you to acknowledge what you did. Not just the conversation I overheard, but the years of treating me like an investment that needed to pay intellectual dividends. I want you to understand that your behavior has consequences. and I want you to respect the boundaries I'm establishing now." "Which are what exactly?" my father asked, his voice cold. "I will not be providing you with any financial or intellectual support going forward. I will not be sharing my new location or research. I will communicate with you only when and if I choose to. If you come to my workplace again or harass me in any way, I will pursue legal action." "So that's it? After everything we've done for you, you're just cutting us off?" "After everything you've done to me," I corrected her. "And yes, unless and until you can demonstrate genuine remorse and change, this is where we stand." My father stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You ungrateful little Robert!" My mother grabbed his arm. Several other patrons had turned to look at our table. He sat back down, seething. "You think you're so much better than us now with your AI empire and your fancy independent research? But let me tell you something, you wouldn't have any of it if we hadn't raised you." "You're right," I said, surprising them both. "I wouldn't be who I am today without you. Every manipulative comment, every conditional show of affection. Every time you made me feel like I wasn't enough, it all taught me exactly what kind of person I didn't want to become. So in a way I should thank you." My mother's tears had stopped, replaced by a stunned expression. My father looked like he'd been slapped. I stood up, gathering my bag and phone. "Your archived digital assets are accessible via a link I've paid for 6 months. The information was sent to your hotel in Geneva, but I can text you the details again if you need them." "That's all you have to say to us?" my mother asked, her voice small. "I hope you find peace," I said finally. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for that makes you treat the people who create for you the way you do. But I won't be your collateral damage anymore." I walked away then, feeling dozens of eyes on my back but standing straighter than I had in years. Outside, I took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air, feeling something unexpected wash over me. It wasn't anger, it wasn't pain, it wasn't even satisfaction. It was peace. 6 months after the confrontation at the cafe, I was fully settled into my new life. I'd purchased a charming townhouse in a secluded research hub in the Pacific Northwest, about 2 hours from my former home, and had transferred my primary research operations there. The change of scenery had been exactly what I needed, close enough to maintain important professional connections but far enough to start fresh. My new lab and home were distinctly mine, in a way my old space had never quite managed to be. I designed it entirely to my own taste, minimalist but functional, with splashes of vibrant art that energized even the longest coding sessions. No inherited equipment, no academic heirlooms, nothing that carried the weight of the past. Professionally, I was thriving. The fresh start had reinvigorated my passion for AI development, and I found myself particularly drawn to helping young innovators navigate the complicated process of intellectual property protection. There was something deeply satisfying about guiding people through one of the most significant stages of their careers, ensuring they understood every license, every patent, every right they had. "You explain things differently than other mentors," one young developer told me after securing their first patent. "Like you really want us to understand, not just sign. Everyone deserves to know exactly what they're agreeing to." I replied, thinking of how differently my own story might have unfolded if I'd recognized the manipulation earlier. My therapy sessions with Dr. Reed continued, though we'd reduced the frequency to twice a month. Our work had shifted from the immediate trauma of my parents' intellectual theft to the deeper patterns that had defined our relationship for decades. "You mentioned something interesting last time," Dr. Reed said during one session. "You said you still sometimes feel guilty for overreacting to what your parents said." I'd like to explore that a bit more. "Sometimes I wonder if I should have confronted them first, given them a chance to explain before taking such drastic action." "What do you think they would have said if you had?" "They would have denied it, or said I misunderstood, or that they were just tired and stressed and didn't mean it." "And would any of those explanations have changed the fundamental truth of what you heard?" "No," I admitted. "It would have just given them the opportunity to manipulate me again. Alex, what you experienced with your parents is something we call intellectual abuse, using your ideas and reputation as tools of control and manipulation. It's particularly insidious because it's often disguised as family helping family or parents looking out for their child. The term intellectual abuse hit me like a physical blow. I'd never considered applying that label to my situation, but as soon as she said it, I recognized its truth. The way they planned to pressure you into signing over your patent. The way they manipulated you into funding their trip. Even the way they made you feel guilty about Professor Finch leaving you the core concepts. These are all forms of intellectual abuse, she continued. And like any form of abuse, the appropriate response is to protect yourself, which is exactly what you did. Something shifted inside me that day. A final piece of lingering guilt dissolved, replaced by clarity. After that session, I began researching intellectual abuse in earnest. I was startled to discover how common it was, particularly within families and academic circles, and how few resources existed to help people recognize and address it. An idea began to form, one that grew stronger with each article I read and each personal story I encountered online. 2 weeks later, I approached my boss with a proposal. I want to create a workshop, I explained, something for first-time innovators, especially young entrepreneurs, about recognizing and preventing intellectual manipulation in major projects. My boss, Vanessa Martinez, listened thoughtfully as I outlined my concept. This isn't just about patent applications, I concluded. It's about empowering people to make creative and financial decisions without manipulation or pressure, whether from family members, partners, or even unethical professionals. I think it's brilliant, Vanessa said when I finished. And timely. We've all seen clients pressured into decisions they later regret. If we can position ourselves as the agency that truly educates and advocates for clients' intellectual autonomy, that's a powerful market differentiation. With her blessing, I began developing materials for the workshop. What started as a simple presentation quickly evolved into a comprehensive program covering topics from recognizing subtle manipulation tactics to establishing healthy intellectual and financial boundaries. I called it Building Frameworks, Intellectual Autonomy in Creative Ventures. We offered the first workshop on a Saturday morning, expecting perhaps a dozen attendees. Over 30 people showed up. The response was overwhelming. People shared stories of parents who had pressured them into inappropriate investments, partners who had undermined their creative confidence, friends who had manipulated them into sharing ideas for unfair gain. Each story resonated with my own experience, reinforcing my conviction that this work was needed. After the third successful workshop, a local tech magazine asked to interview me about the program. The article, titled Code of Ethics: Alex Jones's Mission to End Intellectual Manipulation, brought even more attention to the issue. It was through this growing network that I reconnected with Professor Finch's sister, Aunt Margaret, whom I hadn't seen since his memorial. She reached out after reading the magazine article. "Alex, your professor would be so proud of what you're doing," she told me over lunch. Alistair faced similar struggles with your father throughout his life. Thomas always expected recognition to be handed to him just as his own father had before him. I had no idea, I admitted. Professor Finch never really talked about that. He was private about family matters, Aunt Margaret said. But he saw so much of himself in you, the independence, the work ethic. It's why he subtly guided you towards understanding digital watermarking and protection methods. He knew you'd use your talent as a foundation, not a crutch. Her words echoed the encrypted note I'd found while clearing out his old files, confirming what I'd already begun to suspect. Professor Finch had made his decisions with clear eyes and full awareness of their implications. "Have you had any contact with your parents recently?" Aunt Margaret asked carefully. "Not since our confrontation," I replied. "I've received a few emails, but nothing that suggests they've really reflected on their behavior or taken responsibility for it. Thomas has always struggled with accountability, even as a child. Nothing was ever his fault." "I'm sorry, Alex, you deserved better parents." "I'm making peace with it," I said, surprised to find that it was true. I can't change who they are or how they treated me. But I can use that experience to help others and to build a better life for myself. On the 1-year anniversary of securing my quantum AI and cutting ties with my parents, I took the day off work and drove to the memorial where Professor Finch's ashes were interred. I brought a bouquet of his favorite, brightly colored gerbera daisies and sat beside his plaque. "I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me," I said softly, "about self-worth and standing on my own, about recognizing when mentorship comes with too many conditions. I wish we'd had more time together, but I'm grateful for every lesson you shared." As I sat there, I reflected on how much had changed in a year. The initial pain and betrayal had gradually transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. My parents were who they were. Their behavior reflected their limitations, not my worth. The true burden I'd carried wasn't being their son. It was the exhausting effort of trying to earn intellectual recognition that should have been freely given. In setting those expectations aside, I'd found a freedom I never knew was possible. My phone buzzed with a text from Sam. "Still on for dinner tonight? The whole gang's excited to see you." I smiled as I replied in the affirmative. The gang was a group of friends I'd reconnected with or made new in the past year. People who accepted me as I was, who gave without keeping score, who supported without controlling. This was what real relationships felt like. This was what I deserved all along. As I drove home, I thought about the digital signature I'd left in the AI code. Innovation recognizes its true source. At the time, I'd meant it as a bitter reclamation against their claim. Now, a year later, I saw it differently. Sometimes the heaviest burdens we carry are the expectations we place on ourselves to be perfect enough, accommodating enough, successful enough to finally earn the love and recognition that should be our birthright. Laying down that burden was the most liberating act of my life. That evening, surrounded by friends who had become my chosen family, I raised a glass and a private toast to Professor Finch, to my journey, and to the innovator I was still becoming, unburdened, uncompromised, and finally truly free. Have you ever had to forge a new beginning after being wronged or neglected? How did you navigate your path forward? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this narrative resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more insights on building resilience and rediscovering purpose. Thank you for being a part of this journey.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into a really remarkable story. It's about trust, innovation, family. It's complex.
Yeah, it really is.
Imagine pouring your life's work, right, your big ideas, into this amazing home lab, state of the art.
Mm-hmm.
And then that very space, the one you built for creation, becomes the place where, well, where your own parents try to steal your work.
It's hard to even wrap your head around.
Exactly. We're diving deep into the story of Alex Jones. He's 32, a quantum AI innovator. And for those of you deep in tech, you know, quantum AI isn't just hype.
No, definitely not.
We're talking algorithms using quantum mechanics for like exponentially faster problem solving, stuff that classical AI just can't do. Think advanced materials, complex data.
Huge potential impact. That's the level Alex was operating at.
Right, that's the caliber.
And our mission here really is to unpack the very specific calculated steps Alex took. This happened when he found out his parents, Thomas and Victoria, were actually plotting.
Plotting to do what?
To claim his groundbreaking algorithm as their own. They wanted to present it at this really prestigious conference in Geneva.
Wow.
So this goes way beyond just, typical family arguments. It's kind of a masterclass in protecting your work, your true source of innovation.
And securing his digital signature too, right? That phrase.
Innovation recognizes its true source.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's about him finding freedom from, a lifetime of having his worth tied to their approval and dealing with this intellectual manipulation.
Okay, let's dig into the roots of this conflict then, because it seems like it started really early, back in his childhood.
Did.
His parents, you described them as failed academics, bitter about missing out on professorships.
That's the background, yeah. And they sort of subtly, or maybe not so subtly, made him feel like his ideas were just, extensions of their unfulfilled dreams.
That sounds incredibly frustrating, like constant pressure.
Totally. They'd say things like, true genius is cultivated through seasoned minds, basically implying, his ideas weren't quite there yet, or maybe weren't even really his.
That constant chipping away at his confidence. It really does feel like what you mentioned later, that term intellectual manipulation.
It absolutely fits. Dr. Evelyn Reed, his therapist, later called it intellectual abuse.
Yeah.
Using ideas, reputation as control tools, and often hiding it, behind the idea of support.
That's insidious.
It really is. And that's why Professor Alistair Finch was such a crucial figure. He was the complete opposite.
How so?
Well, unlike the parents, who saw Alex's work through the lens of their own failures or ambitions, Finch saw raw, unbridled potential. He was the one telling Alex, never let anyone tell you what your work is worth. You define that for yourself.
That's powerful.
Those late-night coding sessions they had, they weren't just about tech. They were Alex's escape hatch. They nurtured that independent spirit his parents were trying to squash.
And Alex was successful, despite them. He got that rare research grant when he was just 20.
Yeah, a huge achievement.
But his parents, predictable, right? Called it an unnecessary deviation from their guidance. Even though he was developing this breakthrough quantum AI, earning a six-figure income.
It's amazing, isn't it? The denial.
And they kept pushing their suggestions, started calling his lab the family's intellectual property hub, casually talking about when we present this at Zenith.
While he paid for everything.
Yeah.
All the research costs, the patent fees, all him.
It's infuriating. That whole family doesn't have boundaries thing they supposedly believed in.
Only ever seemed to work one way, didn't it? In their favor.
Yeah. It's a classic pattern in some ways, but just amplified.
It is, and it's important to see how that dynamic wasn't collaboration. It was, parasitic. Their guidance wasn't for him, it was for them. All the risk was on Alex.
Right.
And this really set the scene for the Geneva trip. They decided they were going to the Zenith Global Innovations Conference. And just casually mentioned they'd use his presentation slot.
His slot. Unbelievable.
And Alex.
Yeah.
He funded almost the whole thing.
Yeah.
Flights, premium passes, even spending money. Maybe still hoping for something, some kind of validation.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. Still trying to earn their approval even then. So he's bankrolling their trip, hoping against hope. There must have been a specific moment, though, a tipping point where he couldn't ignore the reality anymore. How did he find out the full truth?
It was actually kind of mundane how it started. A Tuesday afternoon, he called his dad in Geneva, just a routine call about server logs.
Okay.
And somehow his father didn't hang up properly, left the phone on, muffled in his pocket.
No.
And Alex heard them, his parents, talking about him.
What did they say?
It was brutal. They called him a burden from the start, said he was selfish, easily manipulated, that his valuable IP just dropped in his lap. It wasn't just about the money or the credit.
Yeah.
It was pure contempt, calculated contempt.
Wow. Just overhearing that must have shattered him. But from a maybe psychological perspective, what does that reveal about how they viewed him?
It really shows a profound level of dehumanization, I think. They didn't just want his work. They saw him as an object, a tool, a burden, whose success was somehow unearned and available for the taking.
And they had a whole plan.
Oh, yeah. He heard them discussing exactly how they'd manipulate him, get him to transfer patent rights, add themselves as co-creators by playing on his emotions, leveraging supposed declining health, needing retirement funds. They talked about taking over his research grants, even dismissing the AI ethics work he was passionate about.
Ethics work. Why dismiss that?
Probably because it didn't translate directly into profit or prestige for them. It was just in their way. And they finished with basically, possession is 9/10 of the law.
Unbelievable.
That conversation just destroyed any remaining illusions Alex had. But right there, in that devastation, something else clicked. Kind of cold, hard determination. He knew he had to act. Now.
And act he did. But interestingly, his first step wasn't yelling or confronting them. It was getting legal advice.
Exactly. Smart move. He called Liam O'Connell, an intellectual property attorney.
What's the key lesson there for anyone in a similar spot dealing with IP disputes?
I think it's absolutely critical. Establish your legal standing immediately. Don't assume anything. People often think family or collaborators automatically have rights just because they were around or offered opinions.
Right. Proximity doesn't equal ownership.
Precisely. Liam confirmed Alex was the sole inventor. He had the documentation. His parents being in the lab didn't give them a legal claim. Liam's advice was clear. document everything meticulously, give them reasonable notice about access changes, and archive their data securely, read-only.
So legal clarity first, then he moved on to the technical side, right? The cybersecurity aspect.
Yep, full strategic counteroffensive. He contacted Chloe Zhang, a top-tier cybersecurity expert.
And the brief was specific.
Very specific. A quiet, totally effective network shutdown and migration, all within 48 hours. The key requirements were absolute discretion and no traceable activity.
Shutting down and migrating a quantum AI labs network discreetly in 48 hours. That sounds like a monumental task.
Oh, it was immense. Required incredible planning. Far more than just flipping switches. Alex made this incredibly detailed spreadsheet listing every single digital asset.
And he had to be ruthless about ownership, right? No gray areas.
Absolutely. He couldn't afford any ambiguity. While doing that, he also secured a new research facility totally off-grid in the Pacific Northwest, set up new encrypted communication channels, bought burner phones.
Digital phones, wow.
Yeah, he wasn't taking any chances. And he gathered all the critical physical documents, birth certificate, patents, the deed to his lab property, even Professor Finch's will, and put them in a new safety deposit box.
Got us thinking several steps ahead. Securing physical proof alongside the digital assets. It really shows a shift, doesn't it? From trying to please them to protecting himself completely.
It's a total mindset shift. Realizing that intellectual freedom needs physical and legal security too. People often overlook the boring stuff like deeds or wills, especially with family, but they're crucial for undisputed ownership.
And during all this intense prep, he found something else, didn't he? Something from Professor Finch.
He did. A really significant discovery. An encrypted file on an old drive labeled for AJ eyes only.
AJ for Alex Jones.
Right. Inside was a note from Finch dated just a month before he died.
And it was relevant.
Chillingly relevant.
Yeah.
Finch warned him about certain individuals close to you who had a habit of trying to claim credit for other people's work.
So Finch knew or suspected something like this might happen.
It seems he absolutely did. He explicitly wrote that he taught Alex about digital watermarking because he trusted Alex would honor it, protect it, and use it as a foundation to build your own success, not as a crutch.
Wow, that must have felt like Finch was still looking out for him.
Immense validation. It cemented Alex's resolve.
Yep.
It was like Finch had given him the tools for this exact battle years in advance.
So, the day arrives. The migration day at Chloe Zhang's secure data center. Alex described wearing his best suit like armor.
Yeah, a symbolic act. He watched as his core IP, his life's work, was transferred to this new, completely isolated network. And then the old servers were wiped clean. He said it felt like severing a tie and securing his freedom all at once.
It was a powerful moment.
And then, during the physical cleanup of the old lab spaces, another layer. He found an unmarked USB drive tucked away in his parents' shared workspace.
What was on it?
Digital correspondence, years of their failed grant applications, seminar papers with clear signs of plagiarism, even a formal warning from a university about, quote, leveraging another's work.
So Finch wasn't just guessing. He likely knew about their past behavior.
It strongly suggests he did. This discovery confirmed their pattern, giving even more weight to Finch's warning and his guidance on the watermarking. It wasn't just general advice, it was specific to the threat Alex might face from them.
Okay, so the IP is secure, the old system is wiped, then comes the final touch, the silent declaration.
The digital mic drop, exactly. Alex activated this digital signature he'd already built into the core of his quantum AI.
And his parents had already downloaded this version.
Yeah.
For the Geneva presentation.
They had. And this wasn't just some label on the surface. We're talking a deeply embedded cryptographic watermark, something almost impossible to remove without corrupting the entire AI.
What did it say?
Project Lumina, developed by A. Jones. Simple, undeniable, and was designed to appear on any screen displaying the AI's output, specifically when it executed its most complex self-learning function they definitely want to show off in Geneva.
Genius. Subtle but unavoidable.
Precisely. After activating that, Alex took one last walk through his old lab, now empty of their influence, their things. He said he felt this profound sense of freedom, got in his car, drove away, and didn't look back.
Wow. So, cut to about 10 days later, what happens?
Predictably, his old phone, which he'd kept but wasn't really using, just explodes. Messages from his parents.
Back from Geneva.
Back from Geneva. First, angry, furious messages. Then, switching tactics to falsely concerned ones, They'd seen the watermark during their presentation or testing.
And their reaction.
Accusations of sabotage,
Yeah.
threats of legal action. It seems they still couldn't or wouldn't accept that the work wasn't theirs to begin with.
Did they try to confront him directly?
They did. They actually showed up at Alex's firm, tried to cause a scene.
Oh, wow. How did that go down?
His boss was incredible, showed real support, had security escort them out, banned them from the premises, and told Alex to take whatever time off he needed.
That external support must have meant a lot. Confirmation he wasn't crazy, that their behavior was out of line.
Hugely important. It reinforced that he wasn't alone in seeing it.
So eventually there's a confrontation, but on his terms.
Yes, Alex agreed to meet them, but in a public cafe. His choice of venue, his terms, and significantly when he spoke to them, he used their first names, Thomas and Victoria.
Not mom and dad. Why is that significant?
It's a subtle but really powerful shift, isn't it? Reclaiming his position as an adult, an equal, not their child. Setting a new boundary right from the start.
And he recorded the meeting.
He placed his phone conspicuously on the table, recording. Then he just confronted them. Directly. Calmly.
Did he bring up the phone call he overheard?
He played the recording, right there in the cafe. Exposed their entire manipulative plan in their own words.
That must have been intense.
I imagine so. He then calmly laid out the legal reality. They had zero claim to his IP. He rejected their apology, which apparently sounded completely insincere and conditional.
The level of composure that takes. After everything they put him through, just laying out the facts.
It's remarkable. And then he set the new boundaries. Crystal clear.
What were they?
No more financial support from him, obviously. No more intellectual support or collaboration. He wouldn't share his new location or any details about his ongoing research. Communication would only happen if he initiated it. And any harassment would result in immediate legal action.
Phew. Drawn some hard lines.
He had to. And he directly addressed their narrative of sacrifice for him over the years. He reframed it. Their choices were their own, driven by their own issues. But he acknowledged something interesting.
What was that?
He told them their behavior, their manipulation, taught me exactly what kind of person I didn't want to become. Then he just got up and left. Say he felt peace.
Finding peace after drawing those lines. That makes sense. It's an act of self-preservation, really.
And profound self-respect. Setting boundaries, especially with family, is incredibly difficult, but often necessary for healing.
And the healing did continue, right? He started therapy.
Yes, with Dr. Evelyn Reed.
Yeah.
And she introduced that term we mentioned earlier, intellectual abuse.
Hearing his whole story, that term just clays into place, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
Understanding that framework, that ideas and reputation were used against him, disguised as support, it apparently dissolved a lot of the residual guilt Alex felt. It brought this immense clarity to his entire life experience.
And he didn't just keep that insight to himself. He used it to help others.
Exactly. He developed and launched this workshop called Building Frameworks, Intellectual Autonomy in Creative Ventures.
What was the goal?
To help other young innovators, creators, recognize the signs of intellectual manipulation, to empower them to make their own creative and financial choices without that kind of undue pressure or guilt.
Was it successful?
Hugely successful. Got a lot of attention. It clearly tapped into a real need out there. Alex wasn't just healing, he was actively building something positive from the wreckage, creating a community.
That's amazing, turning pain into purpose.
And then another piece of validation arrived, almost like the universe, confirming he was on the right path. He reconnected with Professor Finch's sister, Aunt Margaret.
And she knew something too.
She revealed that Professor Finch had faced very similar issues with Alex's father, Thomas, years ago. Conflicts over credit, manipulation, the same patterns.
So Finch's guidance on watermarking wasn't just foresight. It was based on direct personal experience with Thomas's behavior.
It seems so. It truly cemented the idea that Finch knew exactly who Thomas was and deliberately equipped Alex to protect himself. Just incredible.
So fast forward a year, Alex has secured his AI, he's cut ties. Where is he emotionally?
He visited Professor Finch's memorial, and he reflected on that year. The initial intense pain had transformed into acceptance.
Acceptance of what?
Acceptance that his parents' behavior wasn't about his worth. It was about their limitations, their own issues. He realized the real burden hadn't been the work itself, but the constant, exhausting effort of trying to earn approval and recognition that really should have just been given freely.
That's a profound realization, letting go of that need for their validation.
And that digital signature, innovation recognizes its true source. It took on a new meaning for him.
How so? It started as kind of a defiant reclamation, right?
It did. but it evolved. It came to symbolize laying down what he called the heaviest burdens we carry. Those internal expectations, the need to be perfect or accommodating or successful enough to finally earn love and recognition.
Instead of just recognizing your own inherent worth, your own true source.
Exactly.
So how did Alex find connection after cutting ties with his biological family?
He built a new circle. Close friends who offered genuine connection and support. His chosen family, he calls them. People who accepted him unconditionally for who he was, not for what he could produce.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. He celebrated his journey, the tough parts and the triumphs. And he embraced the innovator I was still becoming. Unburdened, uncompromised, and finally, truly free.
A powerful ending to a difficult journey.
It really is.
Yeah.
So maybe here's something to think about. How often do we, maybe unknowingly, carry burdens like that? Burdens from other people's expectations, feeling like we have to constantly earn things like respect or love, things that should really be freely given.
That's a deep question. This whole deep dive into Alex's story, it really shows that true innovation, real breakthroughs, sometimes start not just with the idea itself, but with the courage to define your own value, to protect your true source intellectually, yes, but personally too. So for you listening, what does true source mean in your life, in your work? And maybe more importantly, what burdens might you be carrying that aren't really yours? What might you be ready to let go of to find your own version of freedom?